Assalamu alaikum. This is Sadia J from Inkistants and Fireflies, where I share some of the topics I'm currently learning or exploring. So today's topic is baseline contrast. So what is baseline? Baseline is basically our starting point. When we are doing something, our brain looks at where we are at. So our brain looks at our starting point, our current state, and uses that as a measuring stick. To understand better, have you noticed how during summer we kind of despise taking a hot shower, but in winter we really find it soothing? Why does that happen? So, so in summer, our starting point is actually different. We are in a very high temperature, we are sweating, and to cool off, to soothe ourselves, we need something cool. In winter, our starting point is that we are freezing and we need something warmer to calm ourselves, to soothe ourselves. Now, if we look at two more contrasting scenarios, first, you spend about 30 minutes on TikTok and then you sit down to read a book. This is scenario X. Another scenario is where you spend 30 minutes gardening and then you sit down to read a book. Now, the question is our starting point in both the scenarios same? You're right, it's not. The starting point in the two different scenarios are different. In the first scenario, our starting point is that we have spent 30 minutes on TikTok absorbed in highly stimulating content. And then we sit down with a book and try to read it. In the second scene, the starting point is that we have spent 30 minutes gardening. Gardening is considered a low stimulating task, especially in comparison to spending time on TikTok. And then we sit down to do at the same task, read a book. So our starting points in the scenarios are different. And what happens is, let's understand this through a picture. Here, after spending 30 minutes on TikTok, this is our current starting point or current baseline. It's really high, right? It's high. And this is the starting point or baseline that is required for starting to read a book or be engaged with a book. See the difference? The gap, the contrast? Yes, this is what our brain records. And when our brain sees this kind of a high contrast, a huge gap or a big leap, it the reaction is also big. So this is your current state is high. This is the required state is low. So from this high, when you come this low, it's natural that reading a book feels excruciatingly slow and boring. But when you spend time in a low stimulating work like gardening, the starting point is already low. Starting point or baseline is already low. And the starting point or baseline for reading a book is actually higher than the non-stimulating task. And here there is also a contrast. Here there is also a gap and a leap. But it's going from low to high. Because it's going from low to high, the task of reading a book feels more interesting and more absorbing, and we are more likely to engage with the book. First of all, what we need to notice is what is our current baseline or current starting point. And then when you shift to the next task, what our brain does is our brain notices this contrast. It records this contrast and it thinks in terms of comparison. Our brain asks, is the task I'm about to do more interesting than the task I have finished just now? And guess what? When will the brain think it will be more interesting? When you move from low stimulating task to a higher stimulating task. When your current baseline is low, but you're moving to a higher baseline. But if your current baseline is high, but you're moving to a lower baseline, that's when your brain, in comparison, thinks that this next task is really boring. That's why we are advised to not start our day with our phone in hands or spend time on social media content, which is highly stimulating all the time, right before a study or work block. Now, what I find even more interesting is that this same contrast can be applied, same concept of contrast can be applied to set our goals. When we are about to set our goal, what we need to ask first is, what is our starting point? Say I have been inactive for 1 week. So after 1 week of inactivity, my current starting point or my current baseline is really low. But if I try to set a really high goal, our brain again thinks in terms of contrast. Let's look at this picture. This is my current baseline. This is my current baseline, and it's really low because I've been inactive for 1 week. And this is the really high goal I'm setting. And our brain sees this contrast and it says, oh, okay, no, that's a really huge leap. We're not going to do that. We can't do that. So it goes into this kind of a negative thinking loop. And the way we can help our brain is by closing the gap or minimizing the contrast. That's where the advice of setting incredibly small goals come in. So instead of setting a high goal, if I look at my current baseline and set a goal that matches that baseline, what happens is that the brain looks at the similar baseline goal and it says that, okay, we can do that, it's doable. Let's look at the picture again. Here, this is my current baseline, which is low, and I have my main goal is still high, but I have started with a really small goal, and it's very similar, it's very close to my baseline, current baseline. So the brain is looking at this and it's like, okay, this is doable. But when I'm setting a high goal right at the beginning, our brain is looking at this contrast and it's going, no way, we can't do that. So when you're setting a goal like this, incredibly small goals that match our current state, and when we are minimizing the contrast, we are helping our brain to minimize resistance, and we are maximizing our chances of getting started on our goal and keep going. So this, my friends, is the very basic concept of baseline contrast and how we can use this concept of contrast between baselines to be more productive in our days. That's it for today. Hope you benefited from this video. Stay tuned for more discussions like this. Sadia J signing out from Ink Stains and Fireflies.